All right, in this video, we'll go to the next tab, which is down here. And this is the part of the Wrenchtime calculator where we're going to calculate the value your organization can get from planning and scheduling. In this step, we'll use your current maintenance productivity, which we estimated in the last video. Now, I'm going to assume we're running with the 30% that was already sitting here. Now, this worksheet works in the same way as the previous one in that the gray cells with the blue text are the ones that you can change. And what this sheet does is basically allowing you to calculate what value planning and scheduling could bring to your organization if you increased your current productivity 30% to the target productivity of 45%. So again, what I'm assuming here is current productivity 30%, and that is the 30% that I got from the previous step. So if you got 25% or 27%, you use that. And then I'm going to assume a target productivity once I got planning and scheduling in place of 45%. And again, like I said before, that's the number I would recommend you use. It's a typical number that is very achievable. It is not world-class, but it is going to get you significant benefit. And for almost all organizations, it's very realistic to achieve. Now, the next thing I need to do is to enter in some more detailed numbers around the number of personnel you have, the shift duration, the shift hours, etc., so that we can actually calculate the value. So the next cell to enter is your shift duration in hours. So here I've just assumed that we work 10 hours a day, 5 shifts per week. So 5 days per week, 10 hours per day. Now we're going to assume that we're going to work 48 weeks per year and we have 20 technicians. Now in terms of an hourly technician rate, what you see here is I've assumed the $100 we talked about earlier. And that's basically the cost of having a technician work at our site for 1 hour. And again, that is not necessarily, or this is not what the technician actually takes home himself, but that is what it costs to the business. The next cell you can see below that is the first calculation, and it basically calculates the number of productive hours per week. And that is simply saying how many productive hours, how many real maintenance hours you should get out of your pool of technicians. Right? So that is basically multiplying the number of shifts and the number of hours per shift multiplied by your technicians and obviously the number of technicians. So in our case, we have a 10-hour shift with 20 technicians, so that is 200 hours per day, and we work 5 shifts per week. So we have, in essence, 1,000 hours at our disposal. But because we only have a productivity of 30%, we will now only be able to actually execute maintenance, real maintenance, hands-on tool time for 300 hours. That is the number before we implement planning and scheduling. And so now we're going to implement planning and scheduling. And as I explained earlier in the video, we're going to assume that we do that with no change in headcount. Now, I described the assumptions for that and the reasons for that in the article that's actually linked in the tool and in the resource section, the article, How to Sell Planning and Scheduling to Your CEO. And the reason we go with no headcount increase is that it's much easier to sell internally in your organization. So what we're assuming here is we have 20 technicians, and we're going to take one of those to become a planner, and we're going to take one of them to become a scheduler. And so we no longer have 20 technicians, but we have 18 technicians, as we discussed earlier in the previous video. So now we have 18 technicians working 10-hour days, 5 shifts per week. So we actually have less hours available in total. But because we've implemented planning and scheduling, our overall productivity is increasing from 30% to 45%. So our total productive hours per week are now actually 405, which means we've gained the 105 productive hours per week we talked about earlier. So even though we've taken 2 technicians out of our pool and made them a planner and a scheduler, we've actually increased the productive hours of the whole crew. And in fact, we've increased our total productive hours by 35%. And that is what you see summarized in the charts to the right. So the pie chart that you see here shows your current productivity, 30%, and your non-productive time, 70%. It analyzes your productive hours per year, your non-productive hours per year, and the value of that productive time and non-productive. And then the chart on the right shows you your planning and scheduling state. So once you've implemented or significantly improved planning and scheduling, your productive time has increased from 30% to 45%. And so your productive hours per year have increased from 14,400 to 19,440. And your non-productive hours have come down correspondingly. Now, if you look at the value of productive time that we had, that was about 1.4 million. Now we've increased that productive time to 1.9 million. So the total gain is about $500,000 per year. And that gain is basically what you get extra out of your technicians, but expressed in dollar value. Rather than saying we get 5,000 more productive hours, we're actually saying we're getting 5,000 more hours, which is worth $500,000 per year. That's the kind of language that your management, your leadership, your CEO will understand and appreciate. And that's really all there is to it. That is how simple the Wrenchtime calculator is. So all you need to do is to enter the specific values for your plant, your current productivity, your desired end productivity, and then make sure you have realistic assumptions for those. Enter the number of shifts, the working hours, the number of technicians, and then the tool will make all the calculations it needs to make. Now, let me just do one quick example, and we'll see how it works. So let's assume we have a slightly less efficient plant to begin with, 25% productivity. And when you see immediately that the chart here on the right is updated, we'll also assume that we'll also achieve a little bit less because we have a bigger step change to make. So we're going to end up with a target productivity of 40% after we've implemented planning and scheduling. Now, we're going to run the same shift duration, 10 hours, and we'll continue to do 5 shifts per week, 48 weeks per year. But we're going to assume that we have a much larger asset, a much larger plant that we're going to do this for. So we're going to assume that we have 75 maintenance technicians that we now need to plan and schedule for. And let's assume that we work in an environment where the value or the cost of our technicians is also a little bit lower. So let's assume that our cost is $80 per hour. Okay, so now we have 75 technicians. The next field we need to enter is the number of planners. Now, you can't have one planner planning for 75 technicians. That's not going to work. And that's what you see below here. That's the planner to technician ratio, right? 1 to 75 simply doesn't work. Now, as I say in the notes here, if you have a stable system and you're a very experienced planner, your planner should be able to plan for 20 to 30 technicians. But it really depends on your environment. It depends also on how well, for example, your PM system is set up. It depends on how many failures you have. It depends on how reactive your organization is. So typically, this is a ratio that's lower in the beginning and then increases over time. So we're going to assume that we have 5 planners. 5 planners. Now, I know it sounds like a lot, but that gives us a ratio of 1 to 15, which is pretty reasonable. Now, in terms of schedulers, I'm always a fan of having one scheduler per site so that you can really integrate. Let's assume, though, that that might be a little bit too much to begin with, and we find a way to break up the scheduling across 2 schedulers, right? So now what we have actually done is we've taken a crew of 75 technicians and we've taken 7 people out, right? 7 people are out. So because the number of technicians we now have left is 68, because we've taken 5 planners away and we have 2 schedulers. So we only have 68 technicians left to work. We're increasing our productivity from 25% to 40%, as you can see summarized in the chart here. But again, we've lost 7 technicians. But even though we've lost 7 technicians, because we are increasing our productivity from 25% to 40%, the value that we're gaining, the value that planning and scheduling brings to our organization with a total pool of 75 technicians is $1.6 million per year. And that's a lot. Now you can imagine if you're doing this for a large chemical plant or a large manufacturing asset, a refinery, an oil and gas installation, or a mine, or another large asset-intensive organization with a big maintenance burden, you can see that the value that planning and scheduling brings to the table is massive. In this case, we've assumed an end state of 40% productivity, which is not that high. It would be quite realistic to eventually drive it up to 45%. That would be very, very realistic. In which case, there'd be more than $2.2 million in additional value compared to the starting point. All right, so that was a not so quick overview of the Wrenchtime calculator. I've probably discussed it in a little bit more detail than I was intending to, but I do think it is useful. So please do take the time to actually do this exercise. Go and download the Wrenchtime calculator, fill it in, play around with your assumptions, test them out. Even better, work with some of your colleagues in a small group and work through this in it as a team and get to the numbers. And I suspect you'll be quite surprised by the potential value your organization can achieve by improving or implementing planning and scheduling. All right, now that brings me to the end of this lesson. It's been a long lesson. This lesson was all about demonstrating the value of planning and scheduling. Now, before I wrap up, before I close off this lesson, I just wanted to remind you of the key points of this lesson. And they were that planning and scheduling is going to allow you to increase your productivity by about 35% from the typical 30% wrench time to a more reasonable productivity of 45%. And secondly, you can show that productivity gain as a monetary gain expressed in hard dollars. And being able to do that will really be very valuable when you engage with senior management, with leadership, to sell the concept of planning and scheduling.